Qatar's Emir has inaugurated the new deepwater Hamad Port as part of a wider plan to ensure economic security. It means larger container ships can now go directly to Qatar rather than docking in the United Arab Emirates, where cargo was transferred to smaller vessels. The UAE is one of the countries that have imposed a land, air and sea blockade on Qatar. The port will have an annual capacity of 7.5 million shipping containers and separate terminals dedicated to general cargo, cereal, vehicles and livestock. It's expected to be fully operational by 2020. Joining us now from London, Andreas Krieg. Andreas is strategic risk analyst focusing on the Middle East, security and assistant professor at King's College in London. Always great to have you with us, Andreas. What impact is the opening of this new port going to have on Qatar's economy?
I think it's a very significant development, irrespective of the crisis. I mean, Qatar was very much dependent on neighboring countries, especially the land border to Saudi Arabia, to get imports and exports out of the country, particularly imports. Although LNG has never been a problem. I mean, Qatar controls the entire supply chain of LNG from getting it out of the ground to actually to the terminals overseas. Anything else that has to be imported or exported from Qatar had to go via Doha port, which was a very small, way too small port in Qatar, which with a maximum capacity of 500,000 to 750,000 containers a year. And now you just mentioned 7.5 million is a significant increase in that. So it provides Qatar with independence. It provides Qatar with the ability to actually store food and to store consumer goods at a level that was never possible before, which makes, again, Qatar more sustainable and more resilient in times of crisis such as these. Apart from that, the Hamad Port is part of a much wider project to create small and medium-sized enterprises around that area that will be able to have direct access to Hamad Port and then again making the logistical costs for these companies to import and export easier. So I think it will have a massive impact also on Qatar's economy for small and medium sized enterprises, because obviously Qatar is trying to diversify, get away from purely relying on hydrocarbons, particularly gas, and then creating a more resilient economy that is based on the private sector. And I think this, for the private sector, this is a huge boost to have access to their own port, which is now 10 times bigger than the current port in Doha in terms of capacity, in terms of the ships that can dock there, in terms of the infrastructure that is needed. You know, this is a 21st century port that a country such as Qatar, with ambitions that Qatar has, needs.
OK. What other measures could the country take to ensure long-term economic sustainability? You said that the opening of Hamad is going to help as far as the ongoing blockade is concerned. What about the long-term future? What else needs to be done? In terms of diversification, Qatar is at a very early stage. The reason is that Qatar, unlike other Gulf countries, is a lot more resilient in terms of its economic setup. The rentier state in Qatar still functions well because LNG can be still produced at very low cost, and the country is relatively small with a small population, so the diversification effort that is pushed now by the government is something that is a precautionary measure looking towards the future. Other countries are actually with the back against the wall. Saudi Arabia, Oman, Bahrain, for example, they need to diversify because they are already in the post-hydrocarbon era. Qatar isn't. But nonetheless, in terms of diversification, it is very important that Qatar is pushing the agenda just to be prepared for the future and have a private sector that is fully operational. And I think, and this is where Hamad Port comes in, it is important to be independent, to have independent trade routes with other countries and not be reliant as they were. They were over-reliant on Jebel Ali, which is the biggest port in the Middle East and close to Dubai. And now being independent of that, and if transshipment is needed, so basically when goods have to be transferred from bigger to smaller vessels, they can now rely on ports in Oman when necessary, but many ships can now directly dock at Hamad Port. That is very significant. The longer this crisis goes on, the more Qatar will develop new trade routes, which will be cheaper. And in many ways, this crisis has been a blessing in disguise, because Hamad Port couldn't have been used to its fullest capacity as it is being used at the moment, because of existing contracts with Jebel Ali and other ports in the UAE. Now, the UAE have decided to cut these contracts, to nullify
nullify these contracts. And now importers in Qatar can now look for more lucrative and maybe cheaper routes directly into Qatar. And the government is doing everything to incentivize this. There is a lot of incentives for local businessmen to create new imports, new avenues of imports, and using Hamad Port to do that. And they can do this in the long run more cheaper, or a lot cheaper than using, for example, Jebel Ali in the UAE. So I think long term, the economic cost of this crisis will go down significantly to a level that it is almost not worth mentioning anymore.
Andreas, great to talk to you. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.